Close NATO allies facing off in a diplomatic spat, a tit-for-tat, with neither Turkey nor the United States looking likely to back down. The US made the first move on Sunday, releasing a statement saying that due to recent events, it was reassessing Turkey's commitment to the security of US missions and personnel, and as a result, it was suspending all non-immigrant visa services at facilities across Turkey. Just a few hours later, the Turkish government responded with a near-identical statement, announcing that it too was reassessing and suspending visa services. The US says it made the decision after a Turkish national working for its missions in Istanbul was detained. He's suspected of having links to the terrorist organisation FETÖ, a group that Turkey accuses of being behind the failed coup attempt last July.
This arrest has raised questions about whether the goal of some officials is to disrupt the long-standing cooperation between Turkey and the United States. We don't know if these arrests are singular events or if we should expect other Turkish staff members to be arrested.
But Turkey says the detainment is part of a judicial process and that the accused man does not hold diplomatic immunity.
Bütün bunlar defa İstanbul Başkonsolosluğunda bir şeylerin döndüğünü gösteriyor. Amerika'nın burada bir defa bir şeyi değerlendirmesi lazım. Bu ajanlar Amerikan Başkonsolosluğuna nasıl sızdı?
It's a great honor and privilege because he's become a friend of mine.
What a difference a few weeks can make. Just last month, US President Donald Trump was singing Turkey's and President Erdogan's praises on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly.
We have a great friendship. As countries, I think we're right now as close as we have ever been.
But those relations have reached a low point in what has been an up-and-down relationship for some time. Turkey has been pushing for the US to extradite Fethullah Gulen from his self-imposed exile in Pennsylvania. He's a businessman and cleric accused by Turkey of planning the coup attempt last year. But so far, that hasn't happened. Another sore point in the relations has been the US's support of the YPG in Syria. The YPG is the Syrian wing of the terrorist PKK, who have threatened Turkey's borders and taken thousands of Turkish lives. Turkey says the weapons provided to the YPG by the US are being used against its military. And in recent months, Turkey has also improved its relations with Russia, working with it and Iran to try find a peaceful solution to Syria's war. With the relationship between the US and Turkey looking fragile, will this dispute continue to escalate? Or will the once close NATO allies learn how to get along? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined here in the studio by former US Ambassador Matthew Breiser. In Washington, we have Lawrence Korb. He was an assistant to the former US Secretary of Defense. And in Ankara, Onur Erim. He's the chief advisor to Ankara's local government. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Matthew Breiser, let me begin with you. Suspension of visa services both ways. Is this a storm in a teacup, or is it something more worrying?
I think, well, it's a little bit more worrying in light of two factors. One, in my 23-year diplomatic career, I never heard anyone talk about using visa suspensions as a political tool. It's a blunt instrument that inconveniences and causes suffering for people who have nothing to do with the dispute. So it and the people in the U.S. government know that. So they're really upset about something, number one. Number two, underlying this issue of the moment is very deep distress and stress on the U.S.-Turkey relationship, as we heard in the report just now. There's a long list of deeply problematic issues that have no resolution in the near term.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so and we'll talk a bit more about those deep underlying issues in a few moments. Let me ask you, Onur Erim, quite directly, who is to blame for this row?
I don't think anybody has an answer to that question. But for this last incident that happened, the last decision made by the U.S. Embassy in Ankara, it seems, again, it seems very uncalled for to begin with. I was actually at a private dinner meeting with the ambassador 2 nights ago on Friday night. And when somebody raised a question regarding to the Turkish employee of the Istanbul consulate, he was very frustrated. And he used a term which I at that point didn't understand, but now makes more sense. He said, when the question was asked, what are you going to do? He said, there's a very old American sports term. He says, we say, don't get mad, get even. Now I understand what that actually meant, and hopefully this was something that was done out of frustration and will be settled back to its normality on both sides very soon.
Yeah, really interesting anecdote. Thanks for sharing that. Lawrence Korb, now Turkey feels, I guess, there's enough evidence to suspect that this person, Metin Topuz, was working for FETÖ, the Gulenists. On the other hand, you have the ambassador backing this person, John Bass. Do you think, Lawrence, that John Bass acted properly by issuing the visa suspension?
Well, I think so, because he was trying to protect someone who has been working for him and for the United States, and wanted to show that you just can't do that to people who are part of our delegation. And I think, as my colleague in Ankara, pointed out, as he told him, don't get mad, get even, because if he had just complained, then nothing would have happened. But by doing something, I think he has gotten the attention of the Turkish government and get them to act properly.
But Lawrence, at what cost? I mean, if this entire friendship unravels with this being the trigger, would it have been worth it?
Well, again, I hope that our relationship is much stronger. But as you talked about in the lead-up, there are a lot of other things going on. While President Trump did praise President Erdogan when he was here, the fact of the matter is that Turkish President Erdogan and many people in Turkey are very upset about the fact that we won't extradite Gulen, not recognizing that Trump can't do that by himself. Under our system, you have an independent judiciary, and they have not been able to present enough evidence. Plus, you had Erdogan's guards assaulting Americans who were peacefully protesting some of Erdogan's policies when he came here. So there's a lot of things going on. But you're quite right. We have got to get back together because our common interest overlay this. Turkey's still part of NATO. You're trying to get some sort of solution in Syria. You've got the whole Kurdish independence problem that you have to deal with. So hopefully we can get back to where we need to be and recognize that while we don't share everything completely, we do have a lot of critical issues in common.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's unpack some of these deeper issues. Let's look at initially what is directly, I guess, related to the potential extradition of Gulen. Let me ask you, Onur Erim, there seems to be a feeling from the Americans and others that Turkey is using people as political hostages, right? So they give the example of Andrew Brunson and President Erdogan's speech where he said, you have a pastor, we have a pastor. There's a kind of one-for-one, swap deal. The Germans have also sort of lightly accused Turkey of trying to do the same thing with Deniz Yücel. Do they have a case at all, Onur?
People have spent months, if not years, in Guantanamo with probably 1/1,000,000th of the evidence that's been presented about Gulen by the government of Turkey. But let's not discuss that. Let's go into a more deeper issue where a strategic partnership is being questioned. I think right now the biggest frustration on the Turkish side about in regards to Gulen issue is that there hasn't been anything at all done by the U.S. government. There hasn't been any questioning. There hasn't been any investigation towards this, or at least nothing that we know of. And I think the fact that the American judiciary system, or actually police forces, are hesitating to even question Gulen is what is deeply threatening the strategic partnership that Turkey and U.S. has enjoyed for almost 100 years right now, and more than that if you go back to Ottoman times. So what the American politicians are turning deaf ear to is something more than the judiciary system, that we are looking for signs of just partnership.
Right.
Just do something about Gulen, whether Turkey is right or wrong, whether Turkey has presented enough evidence to U.S. or not is not a question.
Okay,
we're talking about hundreds of thousands of documents that has been sent there.
Certainly. So let me ask Matthew Bryza, right? Where does the
so at least question this guy?
Okay, so where does the truth lie here? Where we have the one side saying we're giving all these documents, and according to the Turkish state, this is evidence. Whereas on the other hand, the Americans, from what we're hearing, they're going, well, it might not be smoking gun evidence, and then they're attaching peripheral issues like the pastor, Andrew Brunson, and others, and going, maybe you're trying to do a swap deal with us. Is this a miscommunication? What's the issue here? What's the problem here?
I think it's a misalignment of visions of the truth or of philosophies, meaning that for a Turkish citizen, regardless of political party affiliation, chances are you believe that Fethullah Gulen and his organization were behind the coup. Overwhelming public opinion says that, regardless of whether or not you like President Erdogan. And in the U.S. and the U.S. government, there still is doubt that Gulen is really behind it. And that's what really this issue comes down to, right? This guy, Metin Topuz, is accused by the Turkish government of having done a lot of liaising and coordinating with the Gulen organization, but not only with him, but with prosecutors and law enforcement officials who were accused by the Turkish government of being involved in earlier attempts to undermine the current government. So if the United States government then says, well, you have no right to question this guy. Why? Because he works for the U.S. government. That raises all sorts of suspicions. And the fact that maybe the U.S. was behind the coup plotting, at worst, or at best, was so naive that it didn't understand that a member of this coup plotting organization was within its midst. So there's a misalignment of viewpoints in philosophy, more than communication.
And is it possible to ever get the two to match and meet?
It is if what Onur was just saying should happen now begins to happen. If people in Turkey begin to see evidence that the U.S. is really pushing on the Gulen extradition case. And by the way, my contacts in Washington for months have been suggesting that people are working on the case. But if it becomes known that there really is an effort to try to prosecute and extradite him, I think that will change the situation. But otherwise, you'll still have this YPG, Kurdish terrorist organization hanging over everyone's head in Syria, which will make things tough.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the YPG. Lawrence Korb, is that at the heart of it all? The fact that Turkey still can't understand why the US would be supporting the YPG when there's clear evidence that the YPG is the Syrian wing of the PKK. The PKK blows up civilians here. The PKK turns those arms against the Turkish state. Is that the fundamental difference at the heart of this dispute, underpinning all of this?
Well, I think the reason that the United States has allowed the Kurdish forces to become part of the Syrian Democratic Forces is because they're the only ones who were standing up to fight ISIS. The Russians, when they came in, claimed they were fighting ISIS. No, they were going after the people who rose up peacefully against Assad. And with the Kurdish fighters, basically, and the other people we were supporting in Syria, we took back Kobani and we're taking back Raqqa. That's no threat to Turkey. They are not allowing, the United States has in fact said, once this is over, they're going to take away the arms that they gave to these people.
But Lawrence, do you believe that?
I think the whole idea that...
Do you genuinely believe that the YPG is going to give the arms back to the Americans once they've defeated Daesh?
Well, I think the United States is going to take them back. I mean, so I don't think it's a question of them. And that there is no evidence. A lot of people are talking that the YPG is the same as the PKK. That's not true, okay? All Kurds are not the same. The Kurds we work with in Iraq are much different than the PKK. So the idea that all Kurds want the same thing is not true.
But nobody said,
in fact, then the United States sided with Turkey.
Certainly, nobody said that, and nobody said all Kurds are the same. And there is a clear distinction between the Kurds in Iraq and the PKK. Although you have to ignore a mountain of evidence in order to say the YPG has no connection to the PKK. I mean, it's the reality, right, Lawrence? I mean, it's there. It's self-evident.
Wait a second. Again, We've kept them on the other side of the Euphrates River. We have been very responsible. And the whole idea was, if the Turkish government was that concerned, why didn't they come in to fight ISIS back in 2014?
Okay, good point.
We had to do it all by ourselves.
So let's ask Onur Erim. Onur, these people defeated Daesh in the past. They are the best bet to defeat Daesh, even though they might be the sister organization to the PKK. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Be pragmatic, defeat Daesh with these guys. What's Turkey's problem with that? Onur?
We will never enjoy the comfort of sitting in our warm houses when we want to back in D.C. and get involved in Middle East when we like to, and not get involved with Middle East when we don't like to. This entire Middle East, including the Kurdish areas, the Syrian areas, Iraq, Iran, is our backyard. They are our neighbors, and we will have to live with them hopefully till the end of time, as we have for hundreds of years. So what Turkey has to do, what Turkey does in the region, is always going to be very careful. We cannot just go in and do what we like to do every time something comes up, without calculating it very, very finely. So Turkey has been very to the point when it talked about its red lines. Again, I have been in the region many times the last 2 years. If you are not able to connect YPG to PKK very clearly, obviously you have a very misunderstanding of the region and of both organizations. So I will not even go into that. But again, Turkey has been very, very careful when they underlined their point about the region, their fight against Daesh, also known as ISIS, and what they needed to do about PKK for years, and its new arm as YPG, PYD. So Turkey has been very clear about this. Turkey hasn't changed their mind. Again, I was asked a question a couple of days ago that by a Western reporter as to, well, I can understand why Turkey was very much against getting involved with Russia just a couple of months ago about everything going on with Syria right now, and now they are they're back in bed with Russia for the region. Well, Turkey has to do this. Turkey hasn't changed its policy from day one about the region. It hasn't changed its policy about YPG in the region from day one. If they can't do this with U.S., with EU, they will do this with Russia, with Iran, and maybe with China. Again, we are the only major country, major power in the region, along with Iran, who's keeping a very safe distance to the matter, but very close distance. And we will be here next month, next year,
tempted,
and 100 years later.
Certainly. Tough geography, Turkey has to live here. I'm tempted to broaden this argument out into, whether Turkey is turning towards these other countries and going away from the West and so on. I'm gonna refrain from doing so because I want to kind of stay on point and bring us back to the beginning to look at a possible way out of this spat between Turkey and the US. Now, there have been some punches thrown, verbal punches. However, Prime Minister Binali Yildirim has also thrown some encouraging words out there. Let's have a little listen to what he had to say.
States need to solve issues between them by talking to each other. There is no eternal friend or eternal enemy. The actions taken by countries should respect and benefit both at state and public level. If two countries are allies, punishing citizens by displaying disagreements is an inappropriate attitude and does not suit a big country like the USA, and it won't solve the differences between us. We invite the US to be right-minded. This issue needs to be resolved immediately. Our channels are open to all countries. We will continue to support peace in the region.
Matthew Bryza, when you hear that from Prime Minister Yildirim, does it encourage you?
It does very much. I mean, that sounds like a door that is cracked open and actually swung a bit open. Look, my understanding from a statement that President Erdogan, I think, made yesterday was that Turkish Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu was actually not consulted at all before the United States took this step to suspend visa issuances. So allies really don't treat allies that way. And I agree with the Prime Minister, with Prime Minister Yildirim, that this particular tool chosen by the United States, as I said in the beginning, damages the personal interests of common Turkish citizens who have nothing to do with this dispute. That's not the right tool to use. So at least there should be a, if need to be, tough-minded, serious discussion behind closed doors that puts all of these issues on the table.
Lawrence Korb, very finally, you think there's going to be a compromise around the corner?
Well, first of all, I think, I agree that nations don't have permanent friends or enemies, they have permanent interests. But the United States stands up for certain principles regardless. And that's why, for example, when there's no evidence against Gulen, that our Justice Department says they're not going to take that step. Similarly, when you go after someone who's working for the United States for no good reason, we're not just going to, put it aside. Now, having said that, I think we need to sit down and talk about all of these issues.
Okay. Clear fault lines of disagreement here. However, I think it was a healthy discussion. Matthew Breiser, Lawrence Korb, and Onur Erim, I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers.